The reason for this huge increase in the amount of track was the government. The construction of the railroads was heavily subsidized by the government. Enormous amounts of both land and money were given for free to the railroad companies to build these things under the idea that an improved railroad system would be a public good. But they were privately owned, and the profits went into the pockets of private individuals, like Cornelius Vanderbilt, who you see over here in this cartoon on the left, James J. Hill, Colasar Huntington. I believe that's Huntington down there with the beard. These were some of the most wealthy, powerful businessmen of the era, and this was a time of incredibly wealthy, powerful businessmen. They were symbols of concentrated wealth. They were frequently admired for their great success and wealth, but also criticized. You see in this cartoon the workers giving their wages to the monopolists there. And many people saw it that way as well. The railroad also was the really prototype modern American corporation. The corporation that we're all familiar with today develops in the railroad industry. Corporations are great for businesses because they allow you to raise a lot of money because you can sell stock and so basically raise money from thousands or maybe even millions of people. But you're limited in your liability. If there's a problem, I can't sue you, the individual. I can sue your corporation, but I can't touch your money or your house or your car or whatever it is. So limiting liability and allowing people to raise more money are the primary reasons to create a corporation. There were other monopolists, of course. Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie, who I mentioned before, will monopolize steel. By 1873, Carnegie, who had he had gotten rich originally by running the telegraph operation for the Union Army during the Civil War, will have bought the Bessemer steelmaking process, that new, better steelmaking process. And he'll open a steel mill in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He will vertically integrate. Now, vertical integration is where you buy every step along the way. So, for example, Carnegie owned a mountain range, the Mesabi Range in Minnesota, where he got the iron ore from. Then he owned a fleet of ships on the Great Lakes who would take the ore from Minnesota to his factory his steel mill in Pittsburgh. Then he owned the railroads that the steel would go from Pittsburgh to wherever it was going to be sold. So from the time it came out of the ground to when the finished product was sold, Carnegie owned everything involved. His company was, of course, financed by stock. He sold shares in it. And in 1901, Carnegie sold Carnegie Steel, which became U.S. Steel, for $14 billion, which back in the day was an insane amount of money. Carnegie himself would make $450 million from the sale. It was sold, incidentally, to J.P. Morgan, another one of the great monopolists of American history. Carnegie Steel was so powerful, it produced 2/3 of all steel in the world at the time of its sale. Other monopolists would be Gustavus Swift, who monopolized meat packing. Isaac Singer, who monopolized the sewing machine. Now, sewing machines weren't so valuable for the one you had in your house, although there was money there, but industrial sewing machines where a factory would make thousands of shirts a day. Everything was monopolized. Envelopes, nails, sugar, things you never think about were monopolized. The new monopolies were based on the corporation, which was based on a bureaucratic arrangement. This is a division of responsibilities and clearly defined roles, a system of a hierarchy, a hierarchical system, so that there is a clear division of levels of power, and cost accounting. There was a whole army of accountants in any corporation whose job it was to oversee how every single penny got spent and try to save every penny they could. This system created a new profession, or at least greatly expanded an old profession, called middle management. These are people who managed a part of a company that they didn't own. So they worked within the corporation trying to manage or run part of the corporation. I mentioned vertical integration, which is where you buy every step along the way. Horizontal integration is where you buy up all your competitors. And the master of this is J.D. Rockefeller and his company Standard Oil. They began with a Cleveland oil refinery, and then Rockefeller ruthlessly hunted down and destroyed his competitors. He would usually move into a market, charge less than was currently being charged until the refinery in the area could no longer compete, and then when it became unprofitable, he would buy it up cheap. Incidentally, this is what Walmart does today. They move into cities, charge less than the grocery store in the area. When the grocery store goes out of business, there's no competition. They can raise their prices. But Rockefeller also expanded vertically as well. He had a factory that built the barrels the oil was stored in. He had warehouses that held the oil once it was into the barrels. He bought and owned the pipelines that the oil flowed through. He owned the railroad that distributed the oil, and even had a part of his corporation who went out and sold the oil. The oil, from the moment it was in the ground until the moment it was used by the consumer, every aspect of that process was controlled by Rockefeller. Rockefeller is probably the most famous and most associated with the monopolist in American history. He's also a great example of another fact about the robber barons, as we call these people, is that they preached a free market. They preached an open competition, and they were just the winners of the big competition. But the last thing in the world they wanted was competition. In fact, the monopolist's entire goal was to destroy any competition. So their philosophical argument was based around competition, but their reality was based around a complete lack of competition. And in fact, they would get involved in pool arrangements, or cartels. And this would be where multiple producers in one industry would get together and do things like divide up the market. You can have this city, I'll have that city, and we agree not to compete. Or fixed prices. We'll both agree to charge this amount. This worked okay until one side felt like they were losing because of it, and then they might drop prices or start trying to compete in somebody else's area, and then you would have a price war, and temporarily there would be chaos in the industry until order was restored. Now, monopolies were made illegal because monopolies don't help consumers, they help producers. And so trusts were created to hide monopolies. If one person owned a company, it was pretty easy to say that's a monopoly. But what began happening in 1889 when the state of New Jersey first allowed corporations to merge, two corporations to become one, is that first many of these companies, like say Standard Oil, immediately relocated their headquarters to New Jersey so they could be a New Jersey company, and they created a holding company. Now the holding company began buying stock from any company it felt like it could take over. And then the holding company would own hundreds or maybe even thousands of smaller companies, and in some cases would own virtually all the companies within one industry, creating a monopoly. But this type of monopoly was still legal, so this is why they did it, to get away with it. In 1900, 1% of corporations controlled 1/3 of all the manufacturing in America, and a small group of men had enormous wealth and power. Now, we should ask, were the robber barons good or bad? Supporters of the robber barons argue that this was necessary, that this is how America grew into a great economic power. Critics of them would point out the horrible conditions workers worked under, the low pay, would point out that a monopolist and people who controlled these industries benefited themselves far more than they benefited the society at large. But this is a great debate, and in some way is still right at the heart of our politics today.